Hello, brothers and sisters. Raven here. Today we are going into a few letters I have received that were written by Blair Adams and given to the leadership of Homestead Heritage. These were written in 2004. And for those of you who did not see the video I put up on Chained Ambassador, this is something I have received recently and want to go through in detail on this channel because this is more about Blair Adams himself. Because these three letters are ones that were written straight to the leadership, which means he didn't go through the usual editing. He wasn't writing this in a way to make sure it would be what he wanted most people to hear, even within the cult, let alone outside it. So this is where I can feel the most certain I am really reading Blair Adams. And as I said on the other video, I can tell, because of what I know about writing, this is the same person who wrote the books. Only the books, I can definitely see the editing done. But I can see the same general voice, style, etc. within this letter or these letters as I can see in the books. And I don't know if I'm going to go through all three right now at once. I want to go through the first one, then, unless this is going to take a while, I want to go ahead and try to go through the second and third. They're shorter, but if it isn't going to work out well, we'll do those on another video. But I mainly have three reasons I want to do this. Three things I want to focus on as we go through what's in this. Number one, this is going to show a bit of how Homestead is built, structured, what its goals are, what it's trying to be, things like that. It just gives a good idea of what the leadership wants to do with Homestead Heritage. Second thing, getting a look at what he's going to write without the editing, without it being for the general population of Homestead. You know, this is going to be a little more open, a little more honest, a little more straightforward. It's not going to need quite as much of the careful editing and gentleness in a sense. So here we can get a little bit more of how Blair sees things straightforward. And thirdly, this is going to show us who Blair is. Not personally, but as a leader of Homestead Heritage. It may show hints of him personally. It'll show that better here than it would in the other writings. But particularly, this is going to show us, okay, this is how he sees Homestead. This is what he's doing. This is his sort of purpose of it, etc. Because it's something that's come up a lot. It's something people have brought up to me again and again, and not just in Homestead Heritage. Talking to people who have left, watching interviews, videos, different things of people who left other cults as well, it's pretty common that the one person people who leave have the hardest time rebuking, looking down on, saying faults in, is the main leader of the cult. And it's what I hear all the time when I do my videos on the books of Blair Adams. It's about him not being the one who really wrote these books, about it being somebody else because they edited it and added in their own teachings to it and changed what it really was about, and that this isn't really what Blair Adams would teach. This isn't really who he is. Things like that. And this is something I've seen with people who leave a cult, not just Homestead Heritage again, just cults in general. People who are kicked out of cults. People who were members of a cult that collapsed but still try to sort of stay loyal to the teachings in their minds. They say it again and again where they always have this extra admiration for the leader of the cult. And it's always bothered me because it shows more than anything how it still has a hold of their minds, still has a hold of the way they look at what it teaches, what it does. Because they have such a high admiration for this person that pulled them into it, that built it, that created it, that it's harder for them to go at it with a completely unbiased perspective and look at what's really happening. That's why I want to go through this. That's the primary reason I'm going to read this. And you'll see as we go through this, Blair even mentions at multiple points how this is one where he couldn't have any editing done. So this is definitely him. This is definitely his voice. This is his view. This is not somebody else's who came and changed it. This is him. Now, a couple things that will come up in here and you'll see, but I want to just give them to you now to kind of let you know before we get started. As you can see, this was written in 2004. Around this time, Blair was already starting to have trouble with his health. Things were constantly up and down. How much of that was true? How much of it was fake? But you can see by what's in this, he is definitely using it to get things done, to do a bit of what he wants to do. So I'm going to go through and read this where he starts to tell the leadership a bit of what he feels needs to be added in so that things stay stable even after he's gone. Mainly, I want to point out anything that may give a hint of what they teach, that may show a bit more of how he leads, anything more of how he sees his own authority in this, or his own standing in Homestead. And a few little things that may show, okay, this is the same person who wrote these books. So let's get started. Dear brothers, as you know, over the last year I've taken measures to put in order matters in the church, both particulars and those matters involving extremely important orders of relationship. They have been what most burdened me when it seemed that my passing away might be imminent. Twice in the past year, as you also know, I have indeed come close to dying. Now, Brother Robert Ans, one of the brothers whose integrity I most trusted, who is on the membership board and whom I intended to make a constitutional elder, has gone on to be with the Lord. With my own near-death experience of 8 weeks ago, this brings home to me the need to try to finish what I began to do. Now, really quick, you'll notice things like this, where he mentions this need to try to finish things he began to do. He doesn't really give you much as far as what that means. Probably because here he's talking to the elders, the leaders of Homestead, so they probably already know this. So there's going to be some places like that. Mostly I won't worry about that as much because I don't think those are too important to explain. But there's a couple places it might show something that you normally wouldn't see. So continuing. In viewing particulars, one of those areas of my greatest concern is in regard to reinstating people who either left the fellowship under troubling circumstances or were actually disassociated, or disfellowshipped. Just in the past week, this burden came to the fore. He probably means to say forefront. When Brother Howard called us about all that is happening in, I'm not going to use the name, somebody's life, which may soon include a move back to Texas and hopefully a return to the fellowship. So this is about somebody who obviously was of some significance in some way to Homestead Heritage, who left and is, at least at this point, when the letter was written, thinking of rejoining. And I told him that I hope that hers is but one of many more to come. So there already have been many people who left. It's an interesting thing to take note of, partly because of what this letter is about. And because of this hope, I shared with Brother Howard that I feel that it is absolutely critical that we perfectly discern the mind of the Lord for establishing the pattern for just how such reinstatements should be handled. Note, there's the first major error. He's not even going into the theology yet, and already we see something huge. That we perfectly discern the mind of the Lord. They're belittling the Lord. They're treating it as though they should be able to fully understand the mind of God. It's blasphemy, especially when we're in this life, in this world. So that's an interesting thing to take note of here. Very first thing he says that really has anything to do with anything theological, anything spiritual, it's him putting God on a level where they can have perfect understanding of him. Especially as this, so since I've heard, subsequent to the first draft of this letter, that many more are standing in the wings, wanting to return. This is all exciting, encouraging news, but it is not without its burdens and needs, especially for the church. So now we know a lot of this letter is going to be about those who want to become members or re-enter Homestead Heritage after having already left. So no, that's what this is going to be mostly about. It's about how do they decide if they're going to let somebody come back in and be a member again or become a member for the first time. Well, it's interesting why he's writing this. Why is he concerned about this? Because it's not just what he mentions here of how some are coming back. There's more to it. Naturally, this subject touches some of the most sensitive areas in people's lives, since nothing has greater capacity for hurt than to see loved ones leave or be put out from the body that we all believe constitute the sole context for salvation. Note, once again, this confirms it is truly Blair's teachings, Blair's beliefs, that your salvation is determined more by your relationship with the body than your relationship with Christ. Because he says the sole context. So you can't tell me that it's not just this, it's also this, when he says it is the sole context. So this right here shows that teaching, the one that I find more and more is the center blasphemy and heresy that builds Homestead into what it is from Blair Adams. It is his teaching. This isn't something somebody else added into his teachings when they edited it. This is him. So an intense reaction on the part of families is understandable in such situations. But precisely because it is a matter that generates so much intense feeling, it has also generated more problems for the church than just about any other circumstance I know of. So now he mentions families. This is going to come up again and again and again. Now, keep taking note of this. Every time family starts to come and be a part of this, I want you to do two things. Listen to how he talks about approaching it. And as you're doing that, consider what you know of how you've seen family have parts to play in homestead heritage. Compare the way they do things, the way things are, to what's being said here. In fact, nothing has come closer to destroying the relationships in every strata of the body that have made this church what it is and that are so essential to preserving its vision. Let me try to explain. People who leave or have been disfellowshipped are almost always part of families who remain in the fellowship. How profound. Both God and the devil know what agony this brings. This is why Jesus went out of his way to point out in the strongest possible language that being a disciple entailed the unreserved willingness to accept this severance whenever it became necessary, and that a man's enemies would be those of his own household. Note, there's a huge difference here. This is going to be a side note I want to go into really quick, but it's pretty ironic when you stop and you consider this. Remember what Jesus is talking about when he talks about this topic. When he talks about how you have to be able to reject your own family. He's talking to people who might want to join him. People who might want to go and follow him. So leave their family to go with him. Situations Blair is talking about here is the opposite. Because according to him, the ones who are going to be following the truth, following the Bible, are the ones who are staying where they are. Not the ones who are leaving. The ones who are staying with the rest of the family and with this body. Not the ones leaving the family. And I mention this partly because I want you to keep that in mind. What they're talking about doing here is actually the opposite of what Jesus talks about doing. Here it's the one who's rejecting the rest of the family and going down another road, going away from the family, going away from the traditions, going away from the life they had. They're the ones who are in the wrong for Homestead. It's the ones staying with the family, staying loyal to these things, that are in the right. Whereas the passage he's talking about, it's the other way around. The ones leaving the family, leaving the traditions, etc., are the ones going down the right road. And the ones staying with the family and the traditions are the ones who are not following him. Because they're following the family and the traditions. So keep that in mind, because this is pretty much what this is all about. Is their need to stay loyal to homestead heritage. Indeed, the intensity of emotion has often been so fierce that many families have chosen to abandon first the church and then the Lord, rather than see such a severance. Moreover, family members know that no one loves their wayward loved one like the other members of the family. I'm not going to go down that road, but I'll just say lots of generalization here, lots of false assumptions, and it could lead to a long conversation. So let's just continue. So they fear that in such crisis situations, someone may discipline, disfellowship, or make some other ultimate decision about their wayward family member from a position of less love than the family itself possesses for their soul-sick prodigal. This is where a problem has often arisen, for it can lead to hiding protectionism, judgmentalism against authority, and then the subsequent infection and disruption of the church by the activities of the protected sinner. Remember what I said? Keep in mind how they have done things, how family has had an effect on what they do. Moreover, it has not only separated whole families from the church, but has also threatened the very order and core structure of relationships and authority within the church. Notice what he's brought up in both places here. The first one, he says judgmentalism against authority. And then the threatening of the authority within the church. So this authority they're speaking of is the authority within the church. In other words, the leadership of the church. In other words, the people he's writing to and himself. Note, this is always what's there in the background. Right now, this can seem, if you just look at surface level, this can seem like it's nothing but him talking about families and the influence of people who leave and what that can have on families. But note, once he comes here to the problem with this, the issues with this, his concern isn't about what this is doing to the family. His concern isn't about those who have been tricked in the family. His real concern is about how this is causing them to turn against this authority. This is that self-centered aspect I've been talking about. I mentioned it when I did the video on Chained Ambassador. It's something that's an undertone of this whole thing. This is all about him. Because what's bothering him here is not these families going off and not being under the truth. It's that they have turned away from him and his authority, from his building of this society, this structure he's created. This is him trying to keep what he's created in this fellowship, in this society. He's trying to protect that more than anything else. That's what's really the focus of this. And you'll see it keeps coming up. As a consequence, what formerly seemed like unbreakable relationships at times either dissolved into mere tokens of their former substance or else were often left greatly stained and weakened. Sometimes a residue of either fear, suspicion, doubt, resentment, further judgmentalism, outright hatred, or any combination of these has replaced what once was marked by Christian love, trust, respect, honor, and devotion. Where this residue stays, where this residue is, he hasn't told us. He doesn't let us know where it's come to rest. He just says this residue is there. Continuing on. Even when such circumstances have not brought on outright rupture, they have sometimes strained the deep bonds of Christian love and trust in relationships that were ordered of God for his purposes in leading and guiding individuals. Now, really quick, I'm going to give benefit of the doubt, as I try to do when I can. I think this was just poor writing. When he says this of that strained the deep bonds of Christian love and trust in relationships that were ordered of God, I think he doesn't mean it was ordered that God do this, that God was ordered to do this. I think what he really meant to say here was ordered by God, not of God. So I think it was just miswording. But even those things can sometimes come from something a little subconsciously. I don't know that that's what's happening here, but I will say it does fit. He's talking about straining the deep bonds of Christian love and trust in relationships. So, this body that they've been putting so high, it's about the strain on this. That were ordered by God. But he accidentally says, of God. He, as we've seen in many places, and we especially saw Ozzy come out and state bluntly, it's this whole thing of the Christian love, trust in relationships that are really important, not Jesus. Right here, I see ways this may have been accidental, and yet an accidental reveal of the way he really sees it in his mind. Because as Ozzy showed, they make it where Jesus is all about making the church up there as Christ. So they're putting the body above Jesus. It's the Christ, not him. So let's go on. In place of these, an unconscious rearrangement of other existing relationships to produce highly subtle mutual trade-offs of mercy and favor has at times occurred. Here's a great example of the style I was talking about. This is very much like we see again and again and again and again in the books of Blair Adams. Something that could be so simple, put so easily straightforward without any trouble. But because he doesn't want to say it bluntly, he overcomplicates it and makes it sound more intelligent than it necessarily is. So right there you can see a bit of what we've seen many times before. In short, these new relationships have often been worked out on at least some level privately and at times below the level of our full consciousness of God. They are therefore relationships that come to be controlled by the carnal nature and by the forces from below that govern it. So right now he's pointing out why this is so needed, why he needs to write this, why he needs to set in place this very particular way to do it to make sure it's done right in accepting these memberships. And note that govern it, that word, govern, this is going to come up a lot, and this is huge. Because this shows you this is a cult. As such, these relationships, which have been merely manufactured to appear to serve in confirming and covering functions, are actually void of the real authority of God and often directly, if again unconsciously, try to skirt or short-circuit that authority. Such relationships have, of course, also been manufactured to serve in many other areas where the carnal nature is active in far broader spheres and issues than only family life. And I repeat, nothing has come closer to destroying this church. More of him putting the body at the top. As a consequence, since I am the main one, okay, watch that. Since I am the main one who has in the past ministered, even if often through others, to these problems when they arose among leaders. So now he's not just talking about amongst general people and amongst the families, amongst the leaders. He is the main one. who ministers. He is the leader. This is a cult. Those who have tried to make that excuse again and again, that Homestead Heritage is not a cult because they don't have that one single leader, not only are they going by a bad definition, but they are incorrect that there is no main leader. That main leader, as it shows right here, is Blair Adams. I have now, in my own failing health, tried to take measures that would preserve the great gifts that lie in every individual member, while short-circuiting the pernicious and even demonic effects on the body of such carnal relationships, masquerading as they sometimes do as relationships of submission ordained of God. Note the hypocrisy of that. Masquerading as they sometimes do as relationships of submission ordained of God. Once again, ordained by God is probably what he wants to put. But as relationships of submission. This masquerading is their entire society, their entire fellowship. This submission that is false is probably the correct one. The correct one is probably the false one, according to Blair. So note, he doesn't do anything here to really clarify what this submission is, what this masquerade is. He doesn't really describe it much. He expects the leaders to make the bad assumptions. Such issues of authority and submission have been a persistent burden to me because I do not believe the kingdom of God can be established or maintained apart from the unique rule of the king, which is established through the order of relationships of authority and submission in Christ's body. Once again, there it is. He says it can't be established or maintained apart from the unique rule of the king. Sounds good. Sounds true. However, right after that, he shows that what he means when he speaks of this rule of the king, what he really means is this establishment. What has been established through these relationships of authority and submission in the body. It's back to the body. It's replacing the king with the body. So there we go. Blair's teaching that teaching as well. Apart from this order, the authority that is earthly, sensual, and devilish will prevail. Apart from this order, not from salvation, not from his grace, not from his love, not from submission to him, but to the body, not from repentance, etc., not from any of that. No, apart from this order, this cult, the authority that is earthly, sensual, and devilish will prevail. They're the solution. That's what he's teaching here. This order. Not Christianity in general, this order. So no, they don't trust anybody outside of Homestead Heritage because this evil will prevail unless it's with them, with that order. whether through force, through lies, or through personality and image manipulations that rearrange the God-given order for joining specific people together in any given body. God-given order for joining specific people together? Now, I don't want to go too far with this, but that right there is going very much down that road of Calvinism. Just an interesting thought. This brings us to my burden concerning the cruciality of the general order of relationships in the church, especially those involving authority and submission. Let me reaffirm the self-centeredness of this. This brings us to my burden concerning the cruciality of the general order of relationships in the church, especially those involving authority and submission. This is all about his authority, about it keeping authority, about what he's teaching, what he's trying to create, remaining in control and power even after he's gone. That's what this is all about. As you will recall, the Lord showed us last spring that it is a contradiction in terms to speak of anyone taking the place of a founder. I would love to see the discussion he's referring to here. What in the world? You're saying nobody can take the place of a founder? Who's the founder? Blair Adams. Obviously. So what, nobody can take your place? Now, watch the clever language here, where he goes with this, and really stop and consider what he really means by these words. Don't just assume it means what you would mean. Since a founder gives patterns, there is only one founder. Our founder, of course, is Christ, just as he is also our pastor, our teacher, our prophet, and our apostle. But there are also founders in Christ, of local churches and their particular destiny in the large vision of the kingdom. So wait, there are also founders in Christ? So then you lied when you said there is only one founder. No. Once again, when they speak of Christ, they're speaking of the body. Because that's what they see Christ as being now. The body, not Jesus. So let's look at this a little differently. Since a founder gives patterns, there is only one founder. Our founder, of course, is the body, which would be not one founder. That would be many, wouldn't it? Unless we're talking about the founder of the body. This body, Blair Adams. It's the only way I see it making sense of it. But let's give the benefit of the doubt again. Our founder, of course, is the body. Just as he is also our pastor, our teacher, our prophet, and our apostle. Which doesn't say much because, yeah, there are different people within the body with these different gifts, these different roles, etc. But there are also founders in Christ of local churches and their particular destiny in the larger vision of the kingdom. That's why when he says Christ, I think he's really thinking of himself and maybe the board he's writing to. Because later, these other founders he speaks of, he's talking about more leaders around the church. So that's what he's really getting at here. This founder is not Jesus. This founder is him. And it is as true of these micro founders as of our supreme founder. Note that. That is interesting. All of a sudden, he brings in this supreme founder. And he capitalizes founder. However, earlier we said our founder, of course, is Christ. He didn't capitalize that founder. That's curious. There is only one in each local or visionary circumstance. So, there it sounds like he's saying these micro-founders, there can only be one in each local church in a sense. So it's a real reinforcement of this idea you have to have this one single pastor who leads your church. Even if no one will ever assume my place, there it is again. And although you are indeed supposed to submit to one another, note, you, not we, you are indeed supposed to submit to one another. So, even though no one's going to take his place up here, and though everybody here is supposed to stay in equal authority, this still leaves me with 4 great concerns. How in the world can somebody talk like this and you claim they are humble? Let's go through these 4 concerns. First, I am concerned that the church, because of the often assumed equal authority status of leaders, or at least an ambiguity as to just what each one's statute of authority is in regards to others, will degenerate into a sort of mutual congratulation society where everyone confirms everyone else's carnality and no real authority exists to minister to genuine needs, leaving the church to also slowly slip into deeper and deeper carnality. So what he is doing here is he is making it so that anytime you try to make it a group leadership, the very thing everybody has been using on me to try to tell me they're not a cult, that there is no one single leader, because it's led by a group of elders. That very thing they're using to avoid being considered a cult, Blair Adams right here is rebuking and saying you need somebody up there. You need somebody to take that role. That's his first concern. Even when people's intention is precisely the opposite, when close friendships are formed, they have a way of crowding out God's will as the celebration of the love of the brethren pushes the first commandment into second place. Hypocrisy. You guys have been putting the focus, even in this letter, all on the body, and putting him more in second. So don't give me that. Now, a second concern. Second, I am concerned that this implicit equalism, while it is theoretically denied, will lead to a preaching of Christ out of self-ambition. Wait, this equalism is going to cause self-ambition? What? Look at that again. Second, I'm concerned that this implicit equalism, while it is theoretically denied, will lead to a preaching of Christ out of self-ambition. to the end that through a mere appearance of care and love, personality and charisma without character could eventually be used by some to draw away disciples after themselves. The paradox of this is so ridiculous. He's trying to make it sound as though once you have a group of leaders, you're going to have some that are going to try to take too much authority. But if you have one single leader, there's no way he'll try to take too much authority. That's the kind of thinking this is going down. That's the way this works. Very indirectly, as always, as we see in his books, once again, his style of doing it, going at it through the back door, making it sound much different than it is. That's what he's saying here. This is ridiculous. But again, it's all about having this single figure of authority. Or as he said, this single micro-founder of the individual churches. Moving on to the third. Third, I am concerned that if someone does try to exert the Lord's authority to deal with carnality or even with open sin in a leader's life, that we will be met with pride, resentment, envy, hostility, or judgmentalism. As I am sad to say, has happened to me more than once. So, he's saying he's concerned that when someone does try to fix this carnality by exerting the Lord's authority, or even with open sin in a leader's life, that he will be met with pride, resentment, envy, hostility, or judgmentalism, as I am sad to say, has happened to me more than once. He is now trying to make himself a victim of those who do not approve of him taking the authority he has taken. This is the epitome of a cult leader. And now the fourth. Finally, a rejection of all authority other than one's own can take place, which will then lead to division in the church as groups coalesce more and more around their own chosen leaders, split off from the body as a whole. Finally, I am burdened that in order to overcome all these evil ramifications of a co-equal plurality, which we saw the error in many years ago, what's then left of the church will resort to the old, rigid, dead, bureaucratic, and unbiblical configurations of humanly organized denominalism. These are not pleasant thoughts, and I am persuaded of better things for the future of the church. Note really quick, these are not pleasant thoughts, and I am persuaded of better things for the future of this church. But that future will only come to pass if we find and do God's will. So his final point, know what this is. A rejection of all authority other than one's own can take place. This whole problem he has with a, as he is putting it here, co-equal plurality. This whole thing of having a group of leaders instead of a single leader. His problem with it is shown right here. A rejection of all authority other than one's own can take place. This is that rejection of the individual. This is why they want to be rid of everybody else. Blair has to take the lead, has to be the leader, so that nobody else can have a self. Only him. Everybody else has to be rid of their identity. But Blair is the one who gets to have it. Seeing how long this is taking, I'm going to end here for right now. This is obviously going to take much longer than I anticipated. I am going to keep going through this. But I think this is a good spot to stop because this is where you can see what I think this whole document is about. This is Blair keeping power and identity to himself. It's his, no one else's. And as this goes, I'll keep pointing back to this because you'll see the way he's doing this, the way he's pointing, the way he's leading, he contradicts this unless he truly is saying all of this because he needs to be the one in charge. He needs to be the one. Everybody else is following. He is the founder. Without that, a lot of what he says later contradicts these 4 concerns he says he has. So next time we'll go further through this letter where we'll start seeing more and more of him showing how to protect homestead heritage from this issue he's talking about. But keep this in mind. Remember this. Because this shows Blair Adams is not just a pastor. He's not just a minister. He's not just a leader of some kind of ministry. He is a cult leader making himself a false god. See you all next week. God bless.